Okay, so just so the body is aware, it's Carmen 4. And Carmen's background in this is kind of tremendous. And I think that she, as much as, perhaps even more, who knows, I don't know all the criteria for consideration, would have as much opportunity to get on this and be appointed and represent the county as anyone. So that's why I was asking a process.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Paul.
I want to raise one point, and we certainly are open to having that letter of support. I don't know if Carmen, who we know, has applied yet. One of the things to keep in consideration is that about the only constraint on OTC membership is that there can be no more than 2 members of the 5 from one political party. In other words, it has to be balanced, 3-2, one direction or the other. And Tammy Bainey is a Republican, and the seat needs to be filled by a Republican.
Well, there's my naivete.
So I don't know, and I don't know if Carmen...
I'm guessing she's not a Republican.
I think it's important that, even with those restrictions, that we continue to advocate for a representative from our area, because we have been sorely unrepresented on the OTC. So even if there are restrictions, I think continuing to let the governor know that you expect to have a representative from our area. The second largest metropolitan area in the state is unrepresented on the OTC.
So this body knows. I'll have her get in touch with you. Maybe she's too late, maybe she's not, but she expressed her interest.
Okay. Fair enough. And then you'll follow up with the timeline if she's too late, because this body would then have to be able to meet and agree if we were going to send another letter.
I would suggest that if you were so inclined, you could,
Modify this letter.
well, you could either modify this letter, or you could simply pass a motion directing us to have a letter prepared for your signature that addresses the point raised by Councilor Surratt, and in a single letter or a separate letter supports Carmen 4 if she is applying.
And that's a if, because I don't know that.
And that's an if, and that's an if. So it feels, well, I'll let some others speak to it. Councilor?
I think fine. If we, obviously we can consider everybody that's interested, but for right now, I think because we have this in front of us, that time is an issue and it should be uttered forward. I think, and that's a great. You're pointing out the years of service I think is important, and I think possibly even more effectively is that we can come up with a collective years of service for each of those entities that he served under. So if he has 5 years here and 5 years here, and they overlap for a total of 8 years calendar-wise, but you've got 10 years of service on those boards. So I think collectively would be a good number for them to use, or for us to use on that letter, if that makes any sense. And then I agree that him being part of the founding members of the ACT group would be a great addition to that. And so I think, this would be a separate issue, should be probably kept separate at this point, so we can move forward, and then we can all take a look at this, at Carmen's. We don't even know if it's going to go, so I don't think it should hold this up.
Right. Claire?
Thank you. So I would actually support, if this body would vote to support that, having staff draft up a separate letter in support of Carmen 4's application pending, discovery of the fact that she's actually applied. I think, speaking to what Brenda had to say, I think putting forward support for 2 highly qualified candidates demonstrates that this region has the expertise, has the wherewithal to have that representation, that we're not, in a scarcity here in terms of people who could serve in this role. Sometimes, you wonder if you're endorsing 2 people, is that water it down? But I think in a sense it actually strengthens our position in terms of making that strong statement.
And I truly didn't know.
Yeah, Mayor?
I just always want to remind everyone it is a governor appointment, and she makes it based on her own criteria, I think, so, because we have put forward stellar candidates, and so far we've been rejected in the choices we've sent forward. So, but sooner or later we're going to win out on this one. We hope. Yes.
So let's proceed and approve with changes. Can we have a motion to approve with changes the letter on behalf of Sid Lycan? And then let's do that first. And can I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. And then a second request.
So I would move that to direct staff to draft a letter in support of Carmen For's application to the OTC, pending confirmation that she has submitted an application.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's excellent. Thank you very much. I think that's a great strategy. Okay, now we get to move on to 6E, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. Oh, I think, yeah, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. Oh, did I skip something?
LTD.
Oh, I skipped moving ahead. I circled it thinking I'd done it. Excuse me. Moving ahead.
Chair,
Yes.
I will ask, depending on when you have to, and the two mayors have to leave. E is not an action item, but there is direction asked for, and so I will leave it up to you whether you might want to do that quicker item first.
Oh, okay, let's do that first, because, excuse me, Chris, we'll take care of that one first since we have to leave. All right, so we will go to 6E. Gesundheit. Thank you.
So that's me.
That's you, yes.
Just trying to jump the queue here.
Oh, that's me.
So, in your packet, there is a cover memo and a summary of 6 applications for the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, statewide discretionary funds through a competitive grant process that's currently going on. I don't want to repeat everything that's in the cover memo. If you recall, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund is the new public transportation funding out of House Bill 2017. The largest portion of that funding is the formula funds that flow directly to the public transportation service providers, qualified entities such as Lane Transit District. However, approximately 9% of the money was directed to statewide grant programs. Those initial round of grant applications were submitted February 1st, and under the rules of those statewide grants, the advisory committee for the qualified public transportation service providers, LTD, and the area commissions on transportation around the state weigh in on the grant applications. The rules state that the committees that weigh in on the grant applications may provide comment on the grants, should essentially say, yes, they fund or no fund, sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down, and that those bodies may prioritize those applications. The main reason that I'm bringing this to you today is because I sit on the Lane Act representing you. I sit on the Lane Act as your MPO member voting at that act, and the act next week will take this up. The act next week may or may not finish the discussion. It may spill over into April, but I really have a couple of questions for you. Number one, do you have any concerns or comments on any of the 6 grant applications? Number two, would you want me to advocate for the act prioritizing or not prioritizing these 6 applications? And then number 3, there is the potential, and we're not quite sure, but there is the potential for public comment as this moves on to the state level, where the MPO could directly provide input on this, could directly, instead of through the act, comment or prioritize these. I don't want to rush through this too much, but the 6 applications are summarized in the attachment to the cover memo. I have staff here that are much more familiar with all 6 than I am, but if you have questions, we can certainly talk about the applications. And then I will finish by saying that the LTD Advisory Committee, that as I just mentioned, reviews these also, met 2 days ago, and they essentially gave a thumbs up to all 6 applications, and they chose not to prioritize them.
Okay. That's helpful to know. Thank you.
I will say, being a non-voting member of that committee as well as Carl, is there was a lot of conversation about the 99 West Transit Corridor feasibility study as it's presented as a feasibility study, but the application is actually for the full pilot project. So the notes from the committee were to look at separating those, and then I think his name is John from ODOT. I could be wrong. Mark. Oh yeah, Franny's there too. Franny's our other non-voting member.
Mark Bernard.
Mark from ODOT was there and assured the advisory committee that if the feasibility study looked feasible, that the pilot project would be vetted before it is implemented. So there would be enough oversight on that, and it made the committee feel as though giving a thumbs up on it together was appropriate. But that was that was the most talked about, I think, of all 6 applications from that group of stakeholders.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions about this? Okay, so you want to vote from us?
No, again, I want direction from you really on the first 2 questions, which is, do you want me to represent a thumbs up on all of these for funding, or do you have any concern that might direct me to have a thumbs down on funding one or more of them? And then number 2, do you want to direct me to ask the ACT to prioritize, or are you comfortable with the ACT just providing comments?
Yeah, Mayor.
I would advocate for the list as presented, and I wouldn't advocate for prioritization. For some reason, that can go down a rabbit hole sometimes, and if it's not the final decision-making body, then it becomes an issue of, well, we prioritized it, but somebody else completely redid it. So there's, I think what would be helpful for us is, I think some of us, we still have questions about how the STIF is working, period. And so if we had even a little chart about this is the 90% and it goes here and then it goes here and here and here, and how does it get up into OTC or whomever makes the final decisions, is to figure that piece out, and then how does this other amount of money, how does it go through a decision-making process? So that would help us to decide, I think, do we want to prioritize or whatever, is understand how those money, and I know that it's a new pot of money, so the rules are probably going to change after the first round or be modified a little bit. So, but that would be helpful in terms of how we're looking at it, because I've been asked and I'm not sure how that works. So, yeah. So, yeah, so clarity around how this process is working overall. But that would be my recommendation, is send that you advocate for the 6 projects and not prioritize them.
Okay. Counselor?
And just for my clarification, on this list of 6 projects, and they're not prioritized, and we want you to advocate saying go for it, thumbs up. So is there a potential to where part of them will get funded, so to speak, or is this, so if you go forward, are we going to get it all, or is there a possibility of getting some? And if there's some, then possibly I would like to know what sum is going to go forward, what would be taken off, if that makes any sense. But is it going to force us to prioritize, or are we going to be good to go with all of them?
So I believe at this point, first of all, what you see on the list is a funding request and a minimum amount needed to proceed. So in some cases, for instance, the 99 West one, the first one on the list, is asking for $744,000 from the state grant, but minimum needed to proceed is $102,000. If there's a process where there's not enough funding to fund all of the grants around the state, that may want to be one that receives partial funding. I think most of the other ones on here, the Coos Bay to Eugene to Bend vehicle purchase has a minimum amount that's split into 2 potential funding levels, if you will. The Diamond Express, which is the Oak Ridge service, has a minimum amount that is the same as the funding, at least the statewide grant funding request, as do the other 2 that LCOG has submitted. I think, and I'm going to ask Kate if she can help here. I think we have been hearing that the statewide applications are pretty close to the available money. So there's a pretty good chance that most of this is going to get funded.
That's kind of the gist of what I wanted to know is, you know, is this pretty solid, basically, the way it's presented? So we don't have
Yes.
any surprises down the road, and
That's what we're hoping.
okay, great. And just for grammatics, on your agenda sheet, subject E, the last line should have improvement funds and not program.
We caught that. Thank you.
Or public records.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. I got everyone. Any other comments on that? So is there a head nod on go forward?
for a
Not
thumbs up.
Thumbs up, thumbs up, okay, thumbs up, go forward, no prioritization. Any concerns, any thumbs down, folks? No? Okay.
Any thumb sideways?
Any thumbs sideways, right. Okay, thank you very much. And, okay, so then we're clear on things where we really need direction. And now we are ready for moving ahead. Oh, I just have a process question. Mayor and I are both leaving, so who's in charge when we leave the table?
Yes.
I would say Counselor Surratt as.
Oh, boy.
The
You're not gone yet.
I'm not gone yet, but, you know, soon. Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
I can handle it.
Thank you.
Arm wrestler for Arm wrestle for
All right, please.
Chair and members of the committee, I'm Chris Henry, City of Eugene Transportation Planning Engineer, and with me is...
Andrew Martin from Lane Transit District.
We're here to provide you an update on Moving Ahead. Moving Ahead is a joint project between the Lane Transit District and City of Eugene to explore safe and accessible transportation options for people, whether they're walking, biking, rolling with a mobility device, or riding the bus along 5 major corridors in Eugene. Those are Highway 99, River Road, Coburg Road, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and from downtown to Lane Community College. We're going to provide you with a bit of project history, talk about some of our outreach efforts throughout the project, and discuss investment packages. We were last here, I believe, in 2015, as Andrew tells me, so it's been a while. During that time, we've been doing some responsible work to analyze the environmental effects of potential investments along major corridors for people. And there's been some turnover in staff that are still around the location, and also with our consultant teams during that time. What we have produced, and what we'll get into a little bit later, is an alternatives analysis that took a look at many environmental disciplines along each corridor separately. And then we're also developing what we're calling investment packages that you'll hear a little bit about later. We have just a few slides and a video, but there's a lot to talk about, and we're saving time for a discussion there. We can touch on funding that Mr. Zako brought up, because that's an important piece of this as well. And hopefully, our video plays loud enough for you to hear it.
plays at all.
Is there a long-range plan? No, I'm sorry, City of Eugene. I've met him a few times.
We expect 34,000 new residents and 37,000 new jobs in our community by 2032. Existing city efforts like Envision Eugene and our transportation system plan call for managing growth in a way that protects and enhances our quality of life and reflects our shared values as Eugeneans. These commitments include promoting 20-minute neighborhoods where residents can fulfill most of their daily needs close to home, and connecting our community with efficient transportation options, including a network of frequent and reliable transit services that
Thank you for the background, by the way.
So we conducted this alternatives analysis over the last few years and presented it last fall for public comment and received feedback about what was important to people on the individual corridors based on their values. And what we found from the more objective assessment was that the benefits scale to, and the effects on the corridor scale to the level of investment. You spend more, you get more, and you affect people in different ways based on how much money you invest in the corridors or the level of changes that are made to provide for people walking, biking, using a mobility device, or riding the bus. Many of the environmental topics didn't help answer the question of, well, what should we do? What has the greatest effect or the greatest benefit? There weren't very many differentiating factors there. So we looked, and Andrew's going to get into this a little bit later, but we looked at the whole system, the corridors individually, and now we're bringing them back to the community. We're going to have a public comment period beginning March 11th through April 10th, and we have an open house that Andrew will mention as well. And so we're going to be asking now the community to provide feedback on combinations of investments on those corridors.
So as Chris mentioned, last fall we published our alternatives analysis and we did our first public comment period. We went out to the community, I think at like 17 different tabling events. We sent out tens of thousands of letters to people who were within the corridor, within a half mile of each of the corridors. We sent letters to potentially impacted property owners and offered to meet with them individually. And through all that, we tried to build up towards, we held actually 4 open houses, one in each of the corridors. We combined Martin Luther King Jr. and Coburg. So we did 4 open houses, and we did an online open house during that month-long comment period. We asked people kind of 2 questions. We asked them in each corridor, which mode makes this, which alternative makes the most sense? Is it the no build, the enhanced corridor, or the MX alternative within each of the corridors? And we also asked them about what their values were and what the criteria that we're using to evaluate the project, how we should prioritize those. We heard from the in-person open house and the online open house the same things. We heard that people prioritize investments for people who are walking and biking. How this would affect ridership on LTD's network, the potential savings in transit travel time, changes in our annual operating cost, and the number of people and jobs that we serve with these investments. And that was universal across both of them. That's not to say other criteria weren't important, but we found that people really focused on the benefits of the project, and they focused less on the potential impacts that these projects would create. When we asked them about which mode they preferred in each corridor, we heard pretty resoundingly that no build isn't an option, or it's not a good option compared to the other ones. In all the corridors, the no build was the lowest rated alternative. On River Road, we heard that the community very slightly preferred MX over the enhanced corridor, and on the rest of them, we heard that the enhanced corridor was the correct alternative, or it worked the best for them. Keep in mind, these are the average ratings. So what you're seeing in this graph, the gray is the no build, blue is enhanced corridor, and green is MX. And these are the average ratings when we asked about each of those alternatives. So using all of the feedback we got from the community, using the technical analysis, all the environmental work we did, we developed a series of investment packages. And what you see here are the 5 investment packages. You're seeing what we call 2 bookend packages. So we said, what does it look like if you do all enhanced corridor? What does it look like if you do all MX? Keep in mind, the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard corridor, we're not proposing MX. That's only proposed to have enhanced corridor. The rest of the packages, they start out at a lower level of investment. Package A only has 2 build alternatives, and they build upon each other to scale up. Package C is the greatest level of investment out of those 3, with build alternatives in all 5 corridors. So using these, we're going to go back out to the public starting next week, actually, On Monday, we're opening our online open house. We'll be out in the corridors with LTD's outreach bus, trying to generate some buzz and answer questions, get people to take the online open house, and come to our open house on March 18th, which is at the UO Baker Center on High Street. That's from 5:30 to 7:30. We'll be having our open house, sharing information. We'd love to get your feedback on the alternatives, on the packages, I should say. We do have a lot of information to share, way too much for the time we've been given in this meeting. So please check out movingahead.org. There's going to be a lot on there, a lot of really good stuff, I think. And what we're going to do after our public comment period is kind of regroup, summarize all those comments, get ready to take this back to our decision makers. We're going to go to LTD's board and the city council in a joint work session before city council goes on their break this summer. We're going to refine the packages and come back in the fall and hopefully engage our decision makers in some public hearings, joint work sessions, and a conversation about really what the community is going to end up selecting as our preferred package of investments. So with that, I think we'd like to turn it over to questions. I know that we kind of glossed over a lot of things. Some of you may have seen this presentation a number of times, but there's a lot there, and we'd love to answer any questions you have.
Questions, comments? Commissioner Burney, go ahead.
You want to go? Joe?
Commissioner Burney?
Joe? I'm sorry, she's in charge. If you went, I don't know if you can, but the chart that showed the result of public input, yeah, that one. Yes. How many people is that?
So that represents over 400 people.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
400 people, and what would you say your ridership is, or your desired ridership?
Desired ridership is a harder question to answer. Every bus is
Ridership.
full. Our current ridership, I think we're getting about 36 to 37,000 people per day.
Okay, so my only comment, and I know you know this, is that 400 people out of 30-some thousand in order to develop investment package portfolios might not be enough. That's all. And I know you're about to open more public input. I'm the first to admit I don't know what I'm talking about, and I appreciate even being able to be with you all. But what I've seen so far, it looks like the reach is for a quantity of input, not necessarily a quality of input. And I'm also curious how you're debating with the public the different ideas that are forward.
We don't debate, but we listen to their concerns. And I think what you see is one of the challenges with leadership and decision making is that the data doesn't always lead you to the answer. But we have policy framework through Envision Eugene, the Eugene 2035 Transportation System Plan, Lane Transit District's Long Range Transit Plan, the city's Climate Recovery Ordinance, and Eugene's Vision Zero Action Plan that points to us making investments for people moving along these corridors and providing options for them to do so. What we do see with this small sample is a preference to do something as opposed to doing nothing. We're looking at investments over 10 years. It's not all right now. And as far as we've heard about prioritization before, and this is maybe an opportunity where I can elaborate on funding, we've engaged with the Lane Council of Governments to help identify funding sources for us and a strategy and timing for when that funding might be available, and how both at the federal level and the local level, or state and local level, because there could be a mix of how we get all the dollars together to do what we want to do, and maybe how we chip away incrementally at some of these investments. But it is a challenging decision-making process that takes some leadership to do this, I think, to be honest.
Commissioner Piscinier.
Quit selling yourself short, number one.
You've been doing it for 60
You're
years.
good. Don't sell yourself short. We respect what you have to say. But I'd get that out there.
Thank you,
All right. So on your information gathering, and I know this was a partnership between Eugene and LTD, and that's awesome. And we got our thing going too with you guys, so we're not operating in a vacuum. So when you're getting that information from those 400, or a little bit more than 10% of your total ridership, actually not even 10.
Yeah,
So
not even one.
But I'm really, did you, or have you thought of delineating of that group who are, you're doing, mostly get the information you're getting are from writers, but they're not, I mean, that's about all you get. That's kind of hard.
Not necessarily.
Well, so, anyway, if you're not, that's great. But I'd be curious as to how many of that, what percentage of those folks are property owners, not just, not strictly business, but property owners that are along those corridors that would be affected, and what the numbers are there, and also affected businesses and what the numbers are there, the percentage of those compared to the general comments of saying, hey, let's move forward, let's do the enhanced version, da-da-da-da. So I would assume that those numbers start shifting quite a bit the more effect it has on those neighborhoods in regards to the actual property owners and business owners. Is that not true?
Yes.
We sent out, I think it was 304, there are 341 tax lots that potentially have impacts. We sent multiple letters to each of them, and we said, hey, we want to come to you at your business, at your home, and we want to meet with you and explain the project designs. We want to take your public comment. That, I mean, those people may have taken our open house, they may not have.
Right.
But we did a special effort with those people saying, we want to collect your public comment because we understand you're the person who may be, I don't want to say the most impacted, but if we're talking about your property, there's a different kind of impact there. And it's not just property takings, it's access impacts. We looked at it as pretty broadly. Anyone who's going to be especially impacted, we want to make a special outreach effort to them, understanding that we do owe them the opportunity to comment, and it might take a little more effort, and we should do that. So
I'm not sure why.
in our
Probably experienced saying it's almost like pulling teeth sometimes, and I don't know why.
Well,
Until something happens, then it's like,
And they're knocking down your door.
it is challenging, but I think it was also really valuable to get the feedback from the people who did engage with us.
Right.
We heard a lot of, frankly, really good ideas that we're going to take into the next phase, because these are pretty high-level designs.
Right.
We need to get through this stage. We do some environmental work with the Federal Transit Administration to get the funding to get to that next stage where we can sit down and say, okay, we do need to survey, and maybe we thought we were going to impact your property. What if we shifted that station a little bit? And those are the kind of conversations we wanted to have with property owners along the corridor. But we also,
well, I
mentioned
admire what
riders
I
and-
admire what you're doing, and
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a hard ball
Yeah.
to juggle. I totally respect that and admire you for doing that. And that'd be a difficult thing to figure
Yeah,
out.
and we focused on talking to riders, but also we want to talk to a lot of not transit riders, because it is a multimodal project.
Right.
And this isn't just about LTD building another MX line. It is about the multimodal improvements and making the corridor work for everyone, including people who drive. We're interested in safety for everyone on the corridors.
We've met, both agencies were at these meetings with property owners along the corridor, and what was typical that we would hear is and it's similar to how decision-making goes in Eugene, at least on this side of the freeway, is that there was general support for the whole concept and the system, but there was concern about the immediate effects on their interests or their properties.
Thank you.
I've got Commissioner Smith next, and then Ye, and then Reed. Right. MPO Commissioner.
Oh, sorry. So a couple of questions on the enhanced, and what's your judgment on the knowledge of the participants in this, in what their knowledge was of what an enhancement was, what the enhancement project was?
Well, so we had similar information for MX. I mean, I think it's easier to imagine MX because we can point you, say, check that out, it's already operating. I don't want to make assumptions about how people took it, but we had all the same information about it. It is a little different, but one way to, the way I talk to people and they say, what really is this? I say, imagine something that's not MX, but it's not nothing. It's somewhere in between, and we can get into this.
Do you have any illustrations or any descriptions?
Sure, yeah.
How
Lots of them.
detailed were they and easy enough to get to before somebody would put in this kind of input?
Well, if you go through the 400 pages, alternatives analysis, you get a lot of detail about what the definition is and what the effects are. But essentially, the enhanced corridor is frequent service, transit signal priority to bypass points of congestion, and perhaps slightly more frequent stops.
And I think maybe we didn't stress this enough. They work from the same toolbox. So when you ask like, does someone know what that might look like? We're talking about the same treatments. So when we talk about enhanced corridors having queue jumps or things like that, we can go out and show you a queue jump. We have them on 11th Avenue as part of our MX project. It's just scaled down. We don't have as many of them. Maybe instead of a protected bikeway, it's a buffered bikeway.
And so I'm just going to claim, like Commissioner Burney, ignorance on how the presentation was. I read the paperwork and the documents and all that, but I just wonder how many people would go through that and then answer this, got your input from this, how knowledgeable were they before they made these inputs? And that's kind of a concern for me, is enhancement versus MX. And then I share Commissioner Pictionary's concern about where the landowner's involved. And any public agency has problems getting input. Coburg had the same issue, and we try and send out letters and knock on doors and everything, and we still have property owners that, after you've gone through the entire planning process, they come in and say, how dare you? And it's like, where were you for the last 2 years when we were planning this? So that's a given in anything we do. But that input and how knowledgeable was the population to give that input was kind of a concern I had with it.
Commissioner Ye.
Yes. Well, I wanted to mention that the work session that we had with City Council went very well when we approved the investment packages. And I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that this is a investment in our future and a conversation that has to start now. And I think everyone recognizes that, but I think it's important not to lose sight of that. Oh, well, I guess one last thing. Well, one person on the city council, whom I will not name, one of Claire's colleagues, did say something I thought was insightful, which was that if you look at some of the streets that we have now, some of them are really just not working for anyone, drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, and so forth. So if they're not working now, if we're going to get up to 35,000 more people in the next 10 years, possibly, it's probably not going to be that great later. So.
Commissioner Reed.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk about a couple things. Rob Zako mentioned it when he did his public comment earlier about how Transit Tomorrow feeds into this Moving Ahead project. And while we may have had the cart before the horse at some point, I think we have them right now. And Transit Tomorrow will really tell us what our community is looking for with how our transit system operates. And this is specifically looking at how to operate that transit system within our current infrastructure. So when we were talking about Highway 99, River Road, 30th LCC, Coburg Road, MLK Boulevard, and the community's asking us, maybe they're asking us to do rapid bus service in all the major corridors. So we could look at Coburg Road, it's a great example, of putting in 15 or 10-minute service on Coburg Road right now and say that, well, that's not possible. We couldn't do that with the infrastructure we have currently. So when from my perspective, I mean, always getting public engagement. I did my own work in the public engagement sector for a while. It's hard. It's very hard to get people to talk to you until something happens, and then they really, really want to talk to you. And it's a little late. Like, we have some people who are asking now if they can give more comment on our Transit Tomorrow project, which is closed for public engagement at this point. And, you know, we'll of course let them tell us what they want to tell us. But you know, there are multiple facets, and I think it's been a 6-year process. I don't know, I wasn't there for the first few years of it. But there's been a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of thought and a lot of collaboration. And we are all very aware of how the West MX project went with public engagement and business owners. And so everybody at LTD is very sensitive to making sure that we're talking to the right people at the right time. And I know that because this project has been such a long process, that in this next public engagement period, they will be doing more more public engagement than maybe other projects would have done in the past because it's been a while. It's been a bit of time since we've heard directly from the public what they want. So I feel like we'll have a good informed position to make decisions from this fall. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. Any other comments, discussion? So I'll just say I unfortunately missed the joint work session with LTD, and I regret that. It couldn't be avoided. And I guess the only other thing, and you've just addressed a little bit around the transit tomorrow, is, I've also had a concern about what if we carry out these two processes and they give us conflicting information, and what is the mechanism to kind of reconcile that? If, the River Road corridor wants more frequent service, but overall LTD, customers want increased ridership, how do we as two different agencies, work through that? So maybe that's not how it's playing out, but that's just something that comes to mind as we think about this.
You would never support
If you're looking for a response.
Sure.
So I mean, Transit Tomorrow really is a short-range look. Moving ahead, Tom Schwetz, our planning director, describes as kind of the North Star decision, where we want to end up. And Transit Tomorrow, fortunately, the way it's looking, things are not amiss, if you will. But if kind of in a conceptual way, where we have frequent service now is where we're talking about making investments, or not necessarily frequent service in the sense of 15 minutes, but our most popular routes, our routes with the most service right now, those are kind of those corridors, and those are the corridors Eugene's going to grow on.
Right.
So in some way, Transit Tomorrow in the short run might say one thing, but if Eugene is growing in those corridors and they're going to continue to be our most frequent and our busiest corridors, making investments in them, I think, is still it's still a conversation that we can engage in, even if in the short run it's.
Right. Well, so I guess another way to frame that is Transit Tomorrow is asking, how do you want the service to exist today, given the infrastructure we have today? And moving ahead is saying, what is our vision to plan for the infrastructure we want in the future?
And pairing this with the SIF funds that are coming in, we have a lot of interesting projects, a lot of checks and balances that can occur with our spending, and really looking at Transit Tomorrow as this iterative process that every 3 years we'll reevaluate where we are and see how our agency can continue to become adaptive and agile to the changing technology, the growth of our community, economic development regions. Anything that happens, we'll be ready for it before hopefully we get too far along.
Great.
Just really quickly, I just want to make sure it was known that there would never be a discrepancy between the city council and LTD. So if
No, that wasn't what I was saying.
Oh, okay, just making sure. Okay, good. So
It's between the public feedback that we might get
okay.
from those two different processes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I
Thanks.
can't
Yeah.
say just, the public feedback, I think, is public knowledge at this point for Transit Tomorrow. We've seen it in a few presentations, and it is looking similar. There is obviously there are some voices that are in opposition of the masses, or some equitable voices in there, but we are seeing that people want to get places more quickly and have that freedom to do that within some of these corridors.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate the update and the hard work. So our last part of our agenda is follow-up and next steps of various things. So first up is the ODOT update.
Franny Brindle, ODOT. I just wanted to remind everybody, if you haven't heard, that the 6th Street on-ramp to I-105 northbound, eastbound will be closed starting the 18th of March for about 6 weeks. It's the first of the 4 ramp closures that will happen. It's the least amount of traffic on the ramp. It'll give the contractor a good way of sizing up the project, how it's going to go. It's involving bridge rail replacement and bridge joint replacement, as well as panel work, concrete panel work. The other thing I wanted to mention was that we made it through a pretty tough week of storms. We had our maintenance crews working continually at some of their own peril and without power, and I really wanted to just put a shout out to them. And that, that we have a really good group of people that cooperate and collaborate with each other. They worked with the city and the counties to make sure that snow plows and sanding materials were shared. And then last, we are having our director, our ODOT director, Matt Garrett's going to be leaving our agency at the end of June. And the OTC, the Transportation Commission, is going through a thorough process for recruiting a new director, a nationwide search. There will be opportunities for stakeholder input on interview panels and whatnot. So I think it would probably behoove this body to either, mention something about wanting to be involved in that recruitment. So, thank you. That's all.
Any questions for Franny? All right, great, thank you. Springfield Main Street safety update.
Yes. The project is on schedule. Still in the early phases of the project, evaluating existing conditions, developing goals and policies. Their stakeholder advisory committee and the technical advisory committee, those committees both met recently, focusing on developing the goals and policies. Again, everything's on track. Gearing up for a city council briefing
Monday night.
Great. Any questions, comments? Okay. Do we have a rail update?
Yes, we do, Councilor. Thank you. A bill has been introduced into the Washington State Legislature, which would allocate about $3.25 million to develop a rail authority for the Cascadia line. That rail authority would look at 1-hour train rides between Portland to Vancouver, British Columbia. So the rail authority would look at things like governance and things like that, because it would cross 2 states as well as an international boundary. Last year, Oregon promised $200,000, British Columbia promised $300,000, and Microsoft has promised to, right now, another $300,000. They already gave $200,000, so Microsoft is also involved in that. The Rail Authority would be charged with, like I said, developing the organizational structure of this, but would also engage with communities up and down the corridor, including all the way down to Eugene, and look at things as station location, rail alignment, that sort of thing. And last year, the Washington Legislature allocated $1.2 million to develop a business case study to look at a number of trips and fares and that sort of things, as well as a detailed market analysis. And an international advisory committee has been put together to look at all of this. So just as an update, it looks like it's moving forward.
That's very exciting. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Lane Act update.
That's me again.
All right.
The Lane Act will be meeting next Wednesday evening, March 13th. The main topic on the agenda is reviewing the STIF applications. Paul described that for us earlier. Excuse me. There'll be an opportunity for the applicants themselves to present their proposals to the Lane Act. As Paul described, the Lane Act, along with the LTD Advisory Committee, will be presenting recommendations to ODOT later on in the year. That will take a good portion of the meeting. Also on the agenda, there will be some discussion of the OTC vacancy, which you talked about here briefly, and the OTC's efforts to recruit a new ODOT director that Franny just referred to. Those are the main items on the agenda.
Okay. MTIP administrative amendments.
As always, those are in your packet to just inform you of what your advisory committee has done, and if there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Any questions for Paul? I don't see any. And any next steps agenda build to be done? It's like my third MPO, so I don't feel I'm in the know enough to help us build an agenda.
We have plenty coming up.
Okay. Well, great. So this body meets again on April 4th at the Springfield Justice Center. And unless there are any last comments before we adjourn. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the presentations. We are adjourned.
Thank you.